Welcome to another episode of Mysteries Unknown. Guys, I've got a really good podcast for you tonight. I've got Mark with me, and Mark owns a property in southern Texas, and he had several Class A encounters with a Bigfoot creature starting in 2020 and all the way up to today, and we're going to dive into all that. He's got lots of evidence. He actually captured this creature on some photos on a game trail, so we're going to go over all that, and you don't want to miss this episode. But before we jump into any of that, I just want to say thank you for being here, for being part of this podcast. I really couldn't do this without you guys, and if you have an encounter you would like to send me, you can send it to me by email at mysteriesunknownpodcast@gmail.com. But let's jump right in the story. Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, glad to be here. Glad we got hooked up.
We've been trying for a minute, and I'm excited to finally get you on here. And I know you've got a lot to talk about. So why don't you start back at the beginning when you started having this activity on your property in 2020 and just kind of walk us through that.
So I have about 18 acres, but it's the only thicket area that I have, and it's a bottleneck that funnels a bottom back in toward the lake. So it's anything goes north or south of me will be in open areas, but I'm in a bottleneck of timber with a couple of small creeks, and just I'm probably a half a mile from a major creek. So I think maybe, how animals always walk the waterways and stuff like that. I think that's what puts me into the focus on this deal. So on 18 acres, I normally have about 10 cameras watching my deer. I'm kind of like anybody else. I like to name my deer when they're growing and call them bullwinkle or whatever. And in 2020, April of 2020, I was starting to watch for horn growth and stuff like that and count my bucks as they're coming up. They'll start growing sometimes in April, but more May and June, you'll start seeing horn development. So I was checking one of my cameras, and I seen a couple of pigs that were running. And so first thing I'm going to do is actually see what they're running from. And I didn't see anything in that exact photo, but the next photo it really looked like a gorilla coming up out of a creek channel. And so I zoomed that picture in, and it looks like a gorilla. I've showed it to some neighbors, showed it to the game warden. He thinks it's a gorilla. And I'm like, there's nobody got gorillas right there. Let's throw that out the window. And so that kind of went on. And then 21 came around. Didn't have much more activity in 2020 other than that picture. 21 came around, July 2021. I seen some things that were happening and some weird things around the property, tree breaks and stuff. And I thought, that's pretty interesting. And then didn't think much of it like that. 2021, I mean, it's hard to remember back that long, but 21 went by, 22 went by. There were signs every year, but it seemed to happen in July. And I would see things on camera I couldn't explain, or they're too far away, dark shadows, blah, 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 blah. Well, in 2023, we started seeing some more tree breaks. And I'm looking at these tree breaks going, what can do that? And I've seen some shows where they talk about it. I'm thinking, okay, now it's starting to make sense. When you see a tree break and you don't see anything that could have broke that tree or bent it over, you go, that's pretty interesting. So speeding all the way up to 2023, I'm going to put my cameras out, and I'm late this year because I've been so busy. And so in July, I'm going to put my cameras out, and I had 2 cell cameras. All the rest of them are just digital cameras. So my cell camera sent a picture to me instantly. So that's what I want to kind of see. So I'm setting it up on a pond area where I have a feeder next to this pond, and there's a bow stand that's right up from it. So I'm going to go set this up, and all of a sudden a deer comes running right at me. Now, my deer see me there quite a bit. They're not pets, but a doe came running right at me about 60 yards to my right. It just came at me and then went about 60 yards to my right. And I'm thinking, you're crazy, And the next thing I know, I take about 20 steps, and here come another one. And it's running at me even closer, runs right at me, and then dodges me to my right about 40 yards. Well, they go out there about 60, 80 yards, turn around and look back. And I think, y'all crazy. I was like, y'all supposed to be running the other direction. You're not supposed to be running to me. You're supposed to be running away from me. So I thought, well, that was pretty doggone weird. And so all of a sudden, I'm holding my game cam. Now, I don't ever carry my cell phone in the woods with me because I would lose it. I'm not one that loses everything, but I keep my ringer off all the time. So if I lost it, I just better go get another one because I would never find it. Never. And so I don't carry it. The only time I carry my cell phone is when I'm in my side-by-side. So I've got my game cam, which is a cell camera, where it sends signal to cell cameras. And I've got it just turned off. I ain't even set it up yet, other than just getting ready to put it in there and turn it on. Well, I look up and there's a little opening where I had cut a cedar limb off. When I come around my trail, this cedar limb was slapping the front of my side by side. So I was like, one of these days I'm gonna cut all them limbs off that cedar limb. And so I piled them up in this little opening, and all of a sudden I look about 30 yards in front of me and I see something black on the other side of that cedar limb, which with that limb laying on the ground was about 4 feet tall, maybe 4.5. And it's still got all the little pine or the little cedar needles on it, but it's there's places where there's gaps in it, stuff where you could actually see through and whatnot else. Well, I seen it low to the ground, and I just first thing I thought was, now y'all are running from a pig, because I have some wild hogs. And speaking of that, wild hogs, they've just kind of disappeared since 2020. I used to have big herds of them. I hardly ever see a wild pig anymore at all, and I think it's because of this thing. So anyway, I see it low to the ground, and I think, well, y'all running from a pig, and I just keep walking, and it went from, like, I won't say it was laying on the ground, but I'm not limber enough to do it. But as a kid, you could just sit on your legs, back of your legs, and just squat. Well, I assumed it was like that, because it went from like 2.5 feet, 3 feet tall off the ground, and it went up into a linebacker position and was looking at me like a linebacker. It had its arms out to the side like this, and it was looking at me through that limb. And I went, what the heck? And I was like, that's crazy. And then I just took the cell camera and just threw it. And you can ask any of my friends, I'm not scared. I'll fight a tiger, I'm telling you. And I just threw that camera off. I pulled out my pocket knife, I kid you not, and I started to run at it. And by this time, it stood up, and I still didn't think it was 5 or 6 feet tall as I was running toward it. But at 30 yards, I come around in this tree line and was going toward it. It turned around, took 3 steps, and it was in the trees. And I ran in right to where it went in, and I didn't see it ever again. I was just like, that's crazy. There's no way that it got out of my visual and it got out of my sound. I couldn't hear it. I was like, I got to hear it. It's thick. I don't even see the trees moving. I was like, and I looked up. I think, is there any trees it could have got in? Because I know what I just seen. So at that time, I backed up for a minute and I looked and I seen the tracks. I was like, oh, I see the tracks. Well, the tracks are not definite because it's July. The ground's hard. But right under that cedar tree, the ground's a little bit softer, so you can see an impression of the tracks, outlined where it packed the cedar needles down. But you can't tell it's got toes in it, but you can see the outline of it. In fact, I think I've got 2 rights and 1 left foot when it went in beside these trees. I knew right where it walked in, because where I'd cut that limb off was even with its right ear. Well, at that time, I was just bump puzzled of what happened and seen, because I'm not scared, but I just like, what just happened? Because the mind can't relate it fast enough. So you've seen something that you've never seen that don't belong there. And so I thought, man, so I ran back to my cabin. I pulled out a pen and paper, and I drew a sketch of what I just seen. And to me, it looked like a big cousin it. And on paper, it looked like a hairy thumb. It's just like, because I couldn't even see its neck. It didn't have a neck. It was all just like that. It was all together. Uh, but to me, the best way I can describe it is it looked like with a cousin it. Well, I have a tape measure there for measuring deer, so I grabbed it and I went back and I knew that its ear had been right even with that limb cut. So at that point, it was 6'9" to its right ear. So that put it 7-ish over the top of the head, or around the top of it, my figure anyway. So I was still blown away by it. So I called my brother-in-law and told my brother-in-law, and he said, man, you're crazy. I'm like, dude, I'm just telling you, you can't unsee what you just seen. I'm just telling you, I'm not scared of it. I'm not going to have nightmares, but I can't stop thinking about what I just seen. And I said, I'm looking all over for signs, and I've got 3 tracks, but I just, now the tree breaks are starting to add up now, because then I started watching shows where the tree break, and then I started going, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, okay. Yeah, it's telling me it's here, but it don't want to show itself all the time. And so uh, the next day or the day after, I was on my side by side. I'm coming down the trail, and I kid you not 50 yards from where I seen it walk in the trees, it runs across the trail in front of me. It just, I mean, I was like, I mean, it's faster than a bird flying or a dog running. I'll tell you, and it went through the trees and went through a thicket, and I'm thinking, wow. And it's headed down toward this small creek, and I never did see it come out into the opening where I could see it. And I just hollered at it. I said, I'm going to get you on camera. I'm going to get a good picture of you. You just wait. And so 2 days later, I'm on my side by side. He runs across the same trail. It's like he's watching me till I start getting close toward him. And then he runs down the hill, and I had my cell phone with me, and I just picked it up and I went click, click, click. I bet I took 20 pictures as he was going away from me, and I actually out of all those 20, I got one good one. But I got him standing between two trees walking away. You can see his head, or you can see the top of his head where he just comes into a mold of shoulders, and he's just walking away. And you can tell he's not real thick. He's not massive or anything like that. He's 7 foot tall and lanky. And so I felt so relieved that I got a decent picture. And I've showed it to a few people. They said, "Man, that's one of the best pictures I've ever seen." I'm like, "Well, that's all I got," you know. So uh, a week or two, about 2 weeks go by, and I'm telling my grandson, I'm taking him up there and showing him where this happened at. It's all happened in my northeast corner, which is closest to the creek and closest to the lake, and the thickest area I've got on my property by far. And so I'm walking up there, and my grandson, he's only like 5'4", 5'5". He ain't very big. He's 14 years old, I guess, at that time. So he said, Papa. I said, what? He said, come here and look at this. I'm like, what? I walk over, and there's a pig skeleton in the fork of a limb about 7 feet tall. And it just stuck in the fork of a limb. I said, what'd you do that for? He said, I didn't do that. I said, yeah, you did. Don't be pulling my leg like that. Don't jerk on my chain. He said, I did not do it. Well, I didn't think it a minute. He couldn't have never reached that anyway. He was too short. I was like, well, maybe he ain't jerking my leg. Anyway, so that was pretty freaky. And I just shook it off because I didn't pay. I was like, that's crazy. And I didn't take it out or nothing. I just left it there. I come by about a week later. I'm going up through there. And all of a sudden, that tree is pushed over, and the skeleton's about 25 yards away on the ground. Or I won't say 20, but probably about 20 yards. And it's just laying there on the ground because I didn't have no problem finding it being white in the woods. You could see it. But the tree was just pushed over. It wasn't hit by anything or nothing. It was just pushed over. But it was a tree that's only about size, it's a little bit bigger than a Pepsi can probably. So it's not a great big tree, but it was a young tree. So I was like, man, this is getting too much, and so I mean, I don't want it as a pet. My son said, "Why don't you feed it apples?" I'm like, well, I don't want it as a pet. I would like to see it, and everybody knows I've had pet real. In fact, I got a pet armadillo here in the backyard. I pet every day. Tell me you can pet an armadillo? That's crazy. I got one that comes up here and I pet him. I call him Digger. It's the craziest thing you ever seen. But anyway, so that kind of went on, and then. But it seemed like every July. So July 24, I seen a couple of new tree breaks, and I'm thinking, And then I've heard some screams and hollows and some weird sounds I can't explain. A lot of times I'll just be sitting out there by the fire pit, and I'll hear massive trees or trees break or snap that no wind. There's just no reason for it. And so go speeding up to just a couple of months ago, I was sitting at the fire pit, and me and my grandson were sitting there one night, and we hear 4 wood knocks. I mean, distinct wood knocks. And he goes, "Oh my goodness!" And he goes, "Can I knock back?" I'm like, "Sure, go ahead." you know. Well, once he knocks, it just stops. They're not. Nah, we ain't playing that game. Whatever. But we heard 4 knocks, and they were kind of going toward the big creek. And I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. Well, about 2 nights after that, I'm at the fire pit by myself. I hear a couple of limbs snap over to my north, again, over in that corner where I've seen it. And that's where most all my tree breaks are, on that northeast side. I do have some on the west. I have a tree structure on the south that came up after I got another shot on the camera. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So I'm sitting there at the fire pit, and I hear that tree snap over there. And all of a sudden I hear, and I'm like, and there's no cows or horses can even get close to me. There's no way anything can come into my property that's big of size, blah, blah, blah. And now that I mean, I've got so much. I forgot about a couple other camera shots I can send you too. But so I hear that and I go, wow, that's interesting. And I was like, that was a grunt. That was no doubt a grunt, and it's within 200 yards of me for sure. Well, I sit there for a few minutes. I got a smile on my face, because I'm thinking, okay, it's watching me. It's got to be watching me, And so I hear it do it again, and it's kind of more faint at the second time. First time was pretty. The second one was like, it was just real short. It's like maybe even two talking or whatever. It's like one replied back to the other because there was definitely a difference where the first one was and the second one was. They were at least 50 yards apart, but still in the same vicinity of where I've seen my sighting. So let me back up just a little bit. So I think when I was trying to figure out why 21 went by so fast, I remember in 21. So I have a deer coming into one of my feeders, and the camera, you can see the deer coming in, and you can see the two little old bitty eyes. They're round coming in, and you see it, and it comes into the feeder. Well, the feeder, the camera takes another picture of the deer watch close up, and in the background are two eyes that are oval like this, eye shine, and they look like they're 4 or 5 inches apart. They're big, but they're oval. They're not round, and it's looking at that deer that's in that feeder pen. And I was like, boy, that's really weird there, because those eyes are a lot bigger than anything I've ever seen, and they're oval. They're not round. Any other, horse, cow. I'm not even sure how good those eyes shine anyway, to be honest with you. I'm not sure what their eye shine's like, but they would be round because the eyes are round. But when you look at them and they're oval, and you can see they're distinctly be oval in the picture. So I thought, well, that's pretty doggone interesting right there. And then I know I've got at least a picture or two in 22 of something, but I can't remember. I've just got so many pictures on game cams that I've saved through the years. Well, anyway, and this year in September or October, I got my cameras out and I put one in a new road that I just had cut through my property. And when you cut it up through a thicket, the deer are automatically going to follow that easy path. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to put it on this easy path. Well, I'm sitting on the couch one evening. Phone goes ding. I knew I got a camera picture. And so I looked over at it, and there's nothing in the picture. And of course, birds will fly by and trigger them sometimes. But about 160 feet away, I see a black object sneaking through the trees. And it looks like he's kind of hunched over and just kind of walking. And it kind of reminded me when I did see him going down that hill one day, he was kind of tilted over a little bit. It wasn't like straight back. It was kind of tilted over a little bit, leaning forward. It went down the hill. So it kind of reminded me of that. And I've seen it to people, and they say, it's a tree stump, it's a root ball or whatever. And I've gone back and looked at that spot, and there's nothing there. There's nothing where that picture was taken. But it was taken. So it had to be either the bird set it off and it had to catch it in the background, or it was big enough to trigger the motion that far away. That's all I can say. So, speaking on up to now November. So in November, I'd heard a couple of tree breaks back in there, never paid much more attention to it, never heard no more grouse. So my son's down there hunting, and he texted me on the phone. He said, Dad, he said, man, I heard some massive tree breaks behind the deal back there, and I see bushes just shaking and moving and all that behind the feeder. And he said, I just heard a distinct grunt at me. And I'm like, really? He said, Dad, I'm telling you, it was no doubt something behind that feeder, shaking the bushes, and it breaking limbs and snapping limbs, and it was loud. It was trying to be loud. And then it went, at me, and I was like, wow. I said, I started laughing because I'm thinking, finally, somebody's getting to experience what I've been experiencing for 4 years. And so here a while back, we were over there hunting, and I had, actually, after that, so let me back up a little bit. So I missed a little gap there. After my camera, and I got that thing at 160 feet away, 200 yards from where that picture triggered, about a week later, I got a tree structure. And it's an interesting tree structure because it's like a tree had broke. It's as big as a coffee can, maybe a little bigger, 20 feet long. I got a boat that's 21 foot long, so I know it's at least 20 foot long. It was where it had broke. It was over to the south about 15 or 20 feet, 15 for sure. I'd give it 15 feet to the north. And it is, it's really funny. There's a tree that has a fork in it. And so there's a limb that's big around as a Pepsi can pushed between these two. And it's like this. I don't know if y'all can see that. And then the other big tree is laying on top of the one that goes between the forked trees. And then there's I would say at least 8 trees, saplings, that are bent over and crossed underneath it. So that one tree sits in the fork of the ones that are bent over. You can look at it and go, no way. And nature can do some amazing stuff. You can look at that and go, no way did nature just do that. There's no way. And that was about 200 yards from where that thing triggered down in the hole. So now getting back up to my son where he had heard all that and everything else. And I was just like, man, it's you hear things. It's crazy. So my pastor come up and I was showing him some stuff on the property and everything else. And we were coming out from the south to the north, looking to the northeast corner where I had uh, seen most of the activities in the northeast corner. And I look up and here's the thicket. All those trees are just standing there. And in the middle of all that thicket, wind's not blowing at all. And I see this bush going like this. Let me get that. This bush. I said, do you see that? He's like, what? I said, you don't see that bush up there waving and there's nothing else moving in the woods? He goes, no, I don't see it. I guess my angle's bad. I'm like, that's crazy. And I just stopped side by side and I'm watching. I'm thinking, what's moving that bush? It's like a small little sapling bush. It's got a lot of leaves on it at that time still. And it's just waving it. It's just in the middle of a still forest. This one thing is just sitting there waving. And I'm thinking, but I never seen anything with it at all.
Man, I got to say, you're way braver than I am, because there's no way that I could have taken off running after the thing like you did. But, with that being said, like, how did having that encounter affect your life? Because seeing these things and knowing that they're real, that changes everything. And then also, why do you think that always shows up around July?
I don't know. You got to think about how hairy this thing is in July. I'm telling you, these hairs are 6 inches long. It's long. It's not like mangy. It's long. So in July, you know how hot that is. Even if you're a human trying to pull a prank or something, dude, you're going to have a heat stroke because it's hot. You know. So to back up the saying about chasing it, my best friend told me, he said, "You're crazy. That thing's going to kill you." I said, "I'd be famous. I got killed by a Bigfoot." He said, "You are crazy." I'm like, "Well, I'm not crazy. I'm curious more than I am crazy." And it's kind of, I guess, what you'd call these cavers. I've been seeing some of these cavers traveling in these. No way am I going to do that. But you got to be pretty not scared of claustrophobic to go down in them holes. Well, I'm not that, and so far, like I said, it is, well, that actually was my first sighting that I chased it. But now I've seen it 3 times after that, and it shies away from me. So it has not shown me no aggression whatsoever. So I think in my case, even though I did chase it the first time I seen it, the other 2 times it was more skittish than it was, hey, I'm going to confront you. Even when I started chasing it, it didn't confront me. It turned and went away from me. It was already turning to go away from me when I started chasing it, basically. But it could have confronted me. And I think in different parts of the world, there are some that are aggressive. And when you say how it changed my life, that did it. That the visual did it versus finding tracks or anything like that. The visual did it because now I can't unsee what I've seen. So now I started really getting into videos and looking at them. I would love to go on some of these expeditions where they go looking because I'm an excellent tracker. I tracked deer. I ran deer hunts where I had to track deer and hogs that were shot and stuff like that. And I was able, to find all our game pretty much most of the time. And so I've learned to track as a kid all the way to now. So I'm a pretty good tracker. I'm pretty good seeing things at nature. But because of the awareness now of seeing this, I'm more about my surroundings now that I am in tune with my surroundings. I see any little thing out of place now. I used to, you're just tromping through the woods. People go, well, I ain't never seen one. I've been hunting for 45 years. Maybe you ain't looking for the signs because the signs are probably there. You just ain't paying attention to the signs because now that I've seen it, and then I started putting the tree breaks to it because of videos I've seen in the past. They're saying, hey, that's part of what they do. And people that have put a lot more time into looking for these things than me, I just had it fall in my lap, basically. So that's how it's changed me. I have started listening to it. I listen probably more to what the Indians have said than anybody because they're the ones that have lost many of people out of the tribe, kids, because they used to say, hey, don't, after dark, just don't leave the area of the tribe, the area. And so looking back at the history, people say, well, if they were out there, somebody would kill one. Well, I honestly believe they've been killed many times, but people have killed them and said, well, we're not coming forward. Well, we're not going to come forward because they feel like they killed a human or they feel bad about killing it. I've heard people say, well, they look like humans. I can't say that because I couldn't see no facial feature because he had so much hair on his face when he was, and he was looking through a bush at me, so it would have been hard to pick out an eyeball or anything else. Now the picture taken on my game cam in 2020, it's you look hard enough, you can see the eyes, you can see the ears kind of behind the ear. I mean, behind the hair, and you can see his nose, no doubt. He has got a nose like a gorilla. The nostrils are big enough you can put your thumb in them. You can see it. That's not hard to see in the game cam picture. But understand it's 60 feet away. I've zoomed it in so you can see the details and you can see a finger there and a fingernail and so on and so on. But getting back to what I was saying about the Indians know that they lived in those wilderness areas, and so they've encountered everything pretty much that's in the woods at one time or another. And like I said, we'll never know everything that's out there. In fact, not change subject. 3 years ago, after the first camera picture, I started looking at stuff. And that year in North America, they found 137 new species that had never been found. And one was a snake, like a rattlesnake. It was a viper and it was solid green. But it looked just like a rattlesnake, other than it was solid green. And I mean, when you start thinking about what's out there and we don't know, and I'm not sure I'm into the dog man theory because I'm not even sure that DNA can actually be crossed. You know, people say, dogs and stuff. And I've seen some weird things from horses and cows and, the skulls that come out looking, well, that's not right or whatever. But I'm not sure about the dog man theory because I just don't know if those DNAs can actually cross. You know what I'm saying? Does that sounds stupid?
No, I know what you're saying, man. And I talk to a lot of people, and first of all, man, it does change you. Obviously, it sends you down a rabbit hole and it opens up your eyes and it makes you look at the world completely different. But, I think there's a lot in God's universe we don't understand. And like you said, there's new species every day that they're discovering, every year something new. But I think these things are more than flesh and blood. I think there's a supernatural aspect to them. I look at things through a biblical lens, but going back to the Native American thing, man, I've been fortunate to talk to a lot of Native Americans, and it's all in their culture, it's in their history, and you hear about a lot of these people. They would call them man eaters sometimes because they would come into their tribe and steal their children and all these things, and so. It definitely, I think for me, it changed the way I looked at the woods when I went out into the woods and, these things are out there because it's just, it's just a wild world. In your cases, you've had a very fortunate experience with it because it's been all good and that's some crazy evidence that you've been able to capture. But, there's a lot to unpack there. But man, one of the questions I was wondering, and I would love to hear your opinion on, but what do you think that thing, why do you think that it stuck that pig skeleton up in the tree like that, man? What's that about?
I wish I knew because we shoot a lot of pigs sometimes and just let them run off and die because some of the big boars and stuff, you can't do nothing with them and they're nasty. So we usually will gut shoot them and let them die and run off and feed the buzzards. I don't know if coyotes eat them or not. I mean, I've put them out there for bait before, and I've never seen a coyote eat one. I don't say they won't because coyotes will devour a deer, but hogs will eat deer guts, but they won't eat their own guts because I've tried to bait them with their own guts. So that's pretty interesting there. So, man, that was really weird. And like I said, I just shook it off as my grandson did it. And he just says, Papa, I did not do it. I said, you had to have done that. And so, but then when I think how short he is, I don't think he could have done it. I just don't really. And then to come back and see it over, and it wasn't a big skeleton; it was just a small one. But I thought that was pretty weird. I mean, and I was just like, yeah, and I still I still reserve some area there to think he did it, but I just don't know how he could have done it. Because it was wedged in there. And I just looked at him and laughed and said, don't be jerking my chain like that. I'm trying to tell you what happened to me here, and you're going off and putting down this guy like, you're diverting. I said, don't do that. Don't deflect it to something else. He said, I did not do that. And then we go to church every Sunday, and he tells me a lot of times, he said, Papa, I didn't do that. I'm like, yeah, you did.
I bet you he didn't do it. If he's telling you that, I'm sure he didn't. But the behavior of these creatures, man, it just some of these, I always walk away with way more questions than I do answers. And it's one of these things you get into this and you're like, I'm going to figure all this stuff out, but you're never going to figure it out, man. I don't know. There's a lot out there that these things do that are so strange. But do you think that there's more than one on your property? Because I think that if you've seen one, there's generally one close by somewhere, man. What do you think about that?
Well, I won't say this is a 100% sighting, but I was headed to the north, I mean, the south side of my property one day, and I'm on the side by side, and I caught movement to my left. And there's a little old mud hole down there on my neighbor's property that these pigs, when they're around, will go waller in. And I happened to look over there, and just for a split second, it looked like I seen two of them, but it looked like a mom and a small one because one was pretty good size and one was small. And it looked like it was holding its hand just like you'd lead your kid in school. And it was just a split second that I seen it. And here's the weird deal: it was because the big one was brown and the small one was black. Or no, wait, yeah, that's right. It was the big one was brown and the small one was black. And I thought that's weird. And I just thought, and then I stopped and looked back, and I just thought, I scratched my head because, like, did I see what I just thought I seen? So I never did say it was a complete sighting, but I did, or never convinced myself that it was. But I look at that spot every time I drive by, and I don't see that. I don't see anything that could have even made that the brown and black side by side, and it did look like it was crossing that mud hole and going up the hill. It's just like, uh, anyway. So that was I thought was pretty weird, but uh, with all the tree breaks that I'm seeing, here's what's funny. Most of them are 7.5, 8 feet tall, but I've started to notice some that were 4 feet tall, and I thought that's pretty interesting because I never had any other tree breaks at 4 feet tall, and so that might give light to what I think I've seen or might have seen. Might be, and even that tree break over there with the structures where they're all under it like a jungle gym. Maybe that is a juvenile making all that stuff. I don't know. I mean, but that day, I want, like I said, that one still scratches my head because I only got to see it for a split second, but it did look like two, and it looked like a mom leading a kid. It looked like it was literally holding its hand as they were walking through that mud hole.
That's what I would think, man. That makes sense to me. You know, you probably have I don't like to use the word family, but you probably have a family unit on your land, you know, and sometimes if what you're seeing is maybe just a younger male, you know, sometimes they seem to be a little bit more careless is not the right word. Curious, yeah, that's the better word. Where they're, you know, they're curious, and that's probably why you're seeing it. Maybe not the others, but why do you think they're on your property, man? Have you thought much about that?
Well, I don't think they're actually on my property because I'd see them more often if they were, but they definitely hang around it, you know, or on the outskirts because there's definitely thicker areas. My north is pretty doggone thick. You can't walk through it, and the deer always bed there. Uh, but I think between me and the major creek that feeds the lake is the area that is, and that area that you know that bottom goes all the way back up behind Lake Tawakoni, and you know then over toward the Trinity. You know the Trinity's not too far from there, and I've heard all kinds of stuff about the Trinity. So I just think that because that bottom is bottlenecked, I'm probably having more occurrences than because it's just such a small area they go through. And but I forgot to mention about the thermal hunt that I was on about a month ago, or maybe 2 months ago. I was down there wanting to look for some pigs or cow. I actually had one boar coming through, and so I'd gone down there at night and set up with my thermal, and I'd seen that. I was sitting there looking out in the woods, which I cleared a lot of my underbrush so that I could actually see my animals. And that night, I seen a hot sequence back there on the tree, and it really looked like it was just like a hand or something. I mean, it wasn't very big. And then that sequence stepped out, and I could see that it was definitely the roundness of a head. And then that's right where my son heard all the breaks, by the way, where he heard the tree breaks and the grunt come from was behind where my feeder is, and that's where the creek is, and a ditch where I got the picture of him going away from. He was all right in that little same area. And so anyway, uh, as I mentioned before, this thing turned and looked at me, and I could see the big round eyes. And there was about a 6 foot gap right there to bigger trees and more thicker trees. And it crossed that in like a blink of an eye. At that point, when it turned and looked back up over me, and I'm 125 yards away, and it stepped across that in like a bug's fly. It was so fast. It was just a heat sequence. and it was gone. Never, I could never pick it out in the woods again. I looked hard for it, never did. But getting back to the curiosity, the tree breaks. It's funny because I went into Arkansas one time. Once it started happening to me, I started expanding. I wanted to find them somewhere else, and I remember a lot of reports out of Oklahoma and some things that happened to me in Oklahoma. And I went up to Mena, Arkansas, went in the Washita National Forest. We got back in there 15 miles off grid. I'm telling you, we would have broke down. It took us 3 days to get out. We were so far in there. And those tree breaks I found up there was 7 of them went straight to a water source, and every one of them pointed to that water source. Well, it's funny because most of my tree breaks on my north side are all in a row. Almost every one of them are in a row. Now the ones on my south side, the little short ones and the shorter ones in the tree structure, all those tree breaks, the only tree breaks I got over there are the short ones. They seem to be about 4 or 5 feet tall. I don't think I have any tree breaks over there that are 7 and 8 feet tall like I do on the north. But the tree structure is on the south. There's no doubt that tree structure on the south. But that's the only activity I've ever had over there. All their other activity happens in the northeast corner, which is closest to the biggest creek. And I'm telling you, that creek's not even a quarter of a mile from me. But let me back up real quick. I'll tell you about my pigs because in 2020, I'm telling you, I can show you video after video after video where I have 20, and in fact, one video I got 37 pigs coming into the feeder during bow season. And I'm telling you, when I first got my first picture of this thing in 2020, I don't hardly ever see a pig anymore. I have 1 or 2 boars come through, and it's just like they just vanished. I don't even see signs on my property. I look for tracks. I don't even see signs.
Well, it would make sense, man. That's probably one of the biggest food sources this thing has. It's probably hunting these pigs, and that's why you got that picture of it the first time. But it's a wild world, and you talked about being down there at Mena. I'm familiar with that area, man, and it's pretty rural back in there, man. And for something to be doing those kind of behaviors, that's what gets me about this. Is there's usually something from every encounter that I hear that lines up with a perfect stranger across the country telling their story. So it's a wild world, man, and you've had a lot going on. And with all that being said, I would love to know, what do you think these things are?
Man, if I would have seen some facial features, I might could make that determination. I didn't see no facial features, so I can't say it. The only thing that I can say is the camera picture off my game cam. Man, it looks like a gorilla with a human body. It just does. When I seen it walk away, it walks so much like a human. But I watched a video one time of Thinker Thunker, and he broke down how they walk, and the gait is different. And I can't say that because when you first see him, you say, well, he walks like a human. Until you have something side by side to a human walking next to it, then I don't think you can make that indifference of the two. So I won't say it's you know, it, man, I hear this terminology, feral human. Not sure exactly where that comes from. Maybe homeless people just went to the woods because we used to have mountain men years ago that go to the mountains just to get away from the government and or whatever, and just get away from people. And I can see that. I can definitely see it. Don't know that I can see it down here with all the mosquitoes and everything else. It's like, man, who would want to go for that punishment? We got mosquitoes that are like hummingbirds. It's like they're huge. But with more people getting, and I think the sightings have gone up since the 70s or 60s or whatever, because one, you got more population. You got more people moving into these areas. You got more people in sports. Like when I started fishing, man, fishing was just kind of, there was a good following. Well, now it's like trillions of people fish, and all. It's the same thing with hunters. So I think the sightings are just going to continue to go up. There are going to be more encounters. There are going to be more game cam pictures, and so on and so on. And somebody's going to get the evidence. Now, let me run this by you because I heard a guy say this, and it makes total sense to me. Do we think some have been killed? I honestly think 100% some have been killed. I don't have no doubt that some have been killed. And I've listened to some people's testimony say, yeah, we killed one and we buried it because we thought it looked too human and all that kind of stuff. Well, to me, that makes total sense. If you're worried about the government, and the government's kind of pushy in a lot of areas. So this one guy said something that caught my attention one time. Says, you know, the government knows they're there and they're protecting them, and they don't want you to know about them. I said, because they have to know, because there's too many people in the logging industry have had encounters, have found tracks, especially in the Northwest and down around California all the way up, you know, where they're doing all that timbering out there. So it makes sense to me what he said. He said, look, the government sectioned off 140 billion acres for a spotted owl so it wouldn't go extinct. If these things are in all the woods around the world, or especially in the U.S., where the logging industry is so massive, you can't crush the economy by protecting all the woods. I don't want to take all the timber out or anything like that, but you got to think about it. If they protected so much for a spotted owl, and these things are a non or not found animal, whatever. I'm trying to think what I'm trying to think of the word of, but anyway. So they could just say, hey, y'all, we're going to section all these woods off and give them habitat, and everybody's going to protect them like tree huggers and stuff like that, and animal activists and PETA or whoever else. Oh, you can't, no, you can't take no more timber out there. They got to have it. I can see where that could get nasty, because that's how people make a lot of their living. You start taking the woods away from them where they can't make their living and you can't enter them or what. I can see if they was to put them in a protected state as a endangered species, I could see that getting ugly, and I could see it affecting the economy worldwide. So they don't want you. They don't want to acknowledge that they're there because. And I've heard people say, "Well, you know, I killed it," and they said men in black show up and say, "Well, that's a bear you killed." You understand what I'm saying? That's a bear you killed. So I could see that happening. I really could.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I've heard a lot of different stories just like that, and that theory makes a whole lot of sense to me because it'd wreck the economy for one, and it would cause a lot of issues. It would mess things up, and I've heard several stories where they've had the black suited guys show up after they've had an encounter, or government vehicles popping up, things like that. So they definitely know that it's there. And at this point, man, we're just all taking educated guesses as to what these things are, and who knows? We might not ever know. I think they're Nephilim or something in that realm, but who knows? But the government definitely knows.
Yeah, that's Genesis. That's in Genesis 3:6, I think. About the giants. In the Bible, it's in Genesis, and I can't pronounce what they're called. I think you just did, but anyway. But yeah, you got to think about and some of the fossils that have been found. And tracks are found every day. I've talked to Jeff Meldrum, and I've showed him some pictures I had, and he thought they were pretty interesting. And then others, he's like, he shook them off. And I'm like, well, I understand that. I know he's negative about some of the pictures I showed him, but he's not a picture detailist guy. He's a footprint guy. He needs physical evidence he can touch to make him good. And so I love Jeff to death, and I've talked to him on a couple of occasions. And showed him some stuff I've had, and bought some prints off of him, but because I was interested in the prints. But in saying that, again, he's not a picture analyst, and he goes, I don't want to see a picture, show me proof. And I understand that. That's what everybody wants, proof. Show me proof. But then when you show them proof, then they can't accept the proof a lot of times. Scientists want a body, and I don't think we'll ever have a body, because I don't think the government's going to let you put a body out there.
No, I agree with you. I don't think that they'll ever let that happen. And it, it's one of those things, especially with AI happening and all that stuff, it's just going to be harder and harder to prove. But, we just, I tell people all the time, you know what you saw. I know what I saw when I had my encounter, and just, people or just some people are not ever going to be open to it because they don't want to know that thing's there, because it changes their whole perspective. And, that brings me to this point, and I always like to ask people this, but what would you say to somebody listening to the podcast today that maybe doesn't believe, and they're trying to wrap their head around all this, man? What would you say to them?
Never say never. Never say never, because look, I've been in the woods all my life. I'm telling you, I have coon hunted. I've been out there wee hours in the morning. I've seen some things in the skies I thought was kind of funny. That don't mean they're aliens. I've seen craft I couldn't identify. I see this thing, and I can identify it, but I don't know exactly what it is. I mean, it's like you don't see something at 30 yards and go, that's not existent. That's not real. Is it a ghost? I don't think it's a ghost. Does it have some things it might can do? the way it ran away from me and disappeared so fast, other than one time I seen it run about 70 yards in about 3 seconds, that first 30-yard encounter, it was just like it went poof. It was like, you can't get out of my vision in 30 yards, but you did. So that'll make you scratch your head. So, man, I think if you're not look, there's a lot of things we don't believe in. And I've got this marine biologist that fishes with me. He said, Mark, he said, if you've seen some of the stuff we pulled out of the ocean, and he said, we're not allowed to show it to the public because the public would go in panic mode. And he said, so I believe you because I've seen stuff that we pulled out of the ocean that makes no sense. It makes no sense. We don't know everything in this universe. We don't know everything in the water. We don't know everything in the sky. We don't know everything in the land. And you got to realize this. How much land is out there that man has never, and I mean never in capital letters, stepped foot on? There's places in the mountains, I promise you, man, think they've covered, they ain't covered it. They have not been there. So I it's just like you don't believe it till it happens, but you always have to have an open mind. And I have people laugh at me. I'll tell you, it got to a point where my family was thinking I was crazy. And I have had friends, they just laugh when I tell them the story. I'm like, you almost feel like an idiot. You really do. And you go, man, am I seeing things? You scratch your head, you go over it, you beat it up, you think this. And then now that so much is happening, and I'm starting to really, it's like pieces of the puzzle. I'm putting them together. And I won't say I'm going to have another encounter. I'm not saying I'm not going to have another encounter because now that my son has actually heard a growl or a grunt, it's more of a grunt. It does have a little at the end of it like a growl, but it's almost like getting the wind knocked out of you. But you can tell a little. It's interesting. When you played that podcast the other day, that guy walked through the woods and he went, I played that to him. He said, hey, that's it. I said, well, that's what I heard too. Well, anyway, so with that, people just, if they'll start opening their eyes and paying attention, you'd be surprised how many signs are around you never knew. And you can't put them together like tree breaks. If you look at a tree break and go, well, how did that tree break? If there's no physical limb sitting next to it to break it, how did it break? And how did it break 8 feet tall? It's not broke, it's just bent over.
It's just such a wild world we live in. There's so much in God's universe we don't understand, and that's some good advice, man. And you're right. You need to pay attention to your surroundings, be open to knowing that there's a lot out there maybe we just don't know, and have an open mind with this stuff. So, but Mark, I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show, and it takes a lot of guts to come on here and share that stuff because, like you said, even sometimes families give you ridicule, but I appreciate your time and sharing that. And if something happens in the future, man, I would love to hear about it.
Oh, it's just a matter of time. It's not if, it's just when.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to it. So just stay in contact with me, and I really enjoyed that. Guys, thanks for hanging out with me and Mark tonight. What an incredible encounter, and I love talking to people who have these encounters on the property. You just never know what's going to happen in this Bigfoot world. There's so much to unpack, and I love to be able to sit here and share these encounters with you guys, and thanks for just being here, watching these videos. It means an awful lot to me and the people that are sharing these stories. So as always, if you've got an encounter you would like to send me, you can always email me at mysteriesunknownpodcast@gmail.com. Guys, stay prayed up. It is so very important. We'll see you in the next episode.